He changed it back in July of 2016. So 2016 is the year in which he dies. So in July of that year, he makes this change, and he dies in November.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome. This is another episode of Life's Third Act, and we're picking up with part 2 of the life, death, and estate of Leonard Cohen. He made a lot of money. He sold a lot of albums as a result of the tours. They generate a ton of money at the time, larger than a number of large touring groups.
Yeah,
then.
I mean, even larger than the amount that was embezzled that left him broke. Much larger, which is crazy.
So, because his lifestyle was such that he didn't blow through the money, so it ended up creating an estate. So that kind of sets the stage. Leonard Cohen continued to be productive up until his death, interestingly enough. So he had this surge of productivity starting around 2008, and it went on until his death, to his credit. And he left behind a lot of things that have value, his notes, his other writings, drawings, things from his life. He was famous for this, this blue raincoat that he wrote a song about. Famous Blue Raincoat is literally called. There are lots of things like that. There are articles, whether it's clothing or things that are part of his life, his guitar. I mean, just so many things that accumulate, paraphernalia, accoutrements, and whatnot. These things ended up being in a museum exhibit that has generated a lot of money. Let's confirm, it is in Montreal?
It's in Ontario.
Okay.
Yeah.
He has this art exhibit, which is a very valuable asset. It's going to produce money for a long period of time. I'm sure some of it is charitable, but the family receives some of that as well. There's also all the other things we've talked about many times on this show, which is the intellectual property, copyrights that will be associated both with performances as well as the written music. Some of those were sold, but even those that were sold are generating income. So when Leonard Cohen died in 2016, there were a lot of assets, and the value is estimated to be $50 million.
Yeah, around $50 million.
I've seen other estimates significantly higher. As we've talked before, it's difficult to value things because sometimes artists who it's thought will not continue to be real popular, and you assume that over time there will be a continual gradual decline, ending up at zero at some point in the future. While that's theoretically true always, that ultimately they decline, go to zero, the issue is what is the time frame? And we're finding for some artists 50 years, and they haven't started the decline yet in that slope of revenue. So, and others who weren't so strong thereafter became much stronger because after they died, they grew in popularity. Jim Morrison was an example of that. When he died, there wasn't great value put on his estate because, yes, he had hits, but he didn't become the icon. Another good example is Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah, Jimi
so
Hendrix is a great
death
one.
can do that alone. But now these are people who had a lot of talent. So it wasn't just when you die young, you get, you make your estate makes a lot of money over a long period of time. There has to be a lot more to that. But you see those elements associated with Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Doors. Doors, again, they had some popularity a lot. But Jimi Hendrix, he was big, but it's not as if he had a long string of hits. Janis Joplin, I mean, she had just recorded Me and Bobby McGee. Now, she didn't write that. Chris Christopherson wrote it. But she had just recorded it. Her biggest hit came out after the songwriter with whom she had an affair, that she had just left a message on his phone days before she died. This is just a bit of trivia. Days before she died, she called him and said, "You're going to like this recording I've done." He had no idea what she did with it. And so he actually hears it for the first time after he hears she's dead.
Oh, no.
Everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At Tucker Allen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. Tucker Allen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit tuckerallen.com.
But anyway, so these are examples where you can have people who are not that big in their lifetimes and thereafter become that. I'm not suggesting that I think that Leonard Cohen will be that person on that level, but I do think he could grow in popularity.
Yes. I think his work, like not so much, and I hate saying this because I hate separating like the artists from their work, but not so much Leonard Cohen's name as much as his work. Like Hallelujah, obviously we still know that song. It's still very popular. And I think like a lot of his work will live on, unfortunately, with his name kind of detached from it until people go digging a little farther.
Yeah. Yeah. And another example of this we can find in other artists. Vincent van Gogh is a good example of somebody who literally had sold, I think he sold technically one work before he died for a couple $100. Literally one work before he died. And some argue that wasn't really a sale. So how is it that somebody who no one had an interest in the thousands of pieces he had that he had created, no one wanted to buy it. It's not as if he didn't try to sell it. His brother Theo ran this art gallery, had this high management position in a prominent art gallery in Paris. And, there wasn't a demand. But so that's a good example. So when you're valuing an estate of an artist, it can be great from IRS standpoint. The IRS looks at it and says, no, that's, no taxes on that. I guess the other can be true too, is you have an estate that has a lot of value at the time and then goes down to zero based on predictions of, the future success of memorabilia or intellectual property, et cetera. So let's talk a little bit about the estate planning that Leonard Cohen did. He did some things right. He had the benefit of knowing what his father had done, and he probably thought that was a pretty good thing. His father had a payout over time that he received. He did not get a pot of money dumped in his lap, and that was a good thing. So he ended up over a period of years having a significant income, not a lavish income, but substantial, enough for him to live the life certainly he lived, which was relatively modest, maybe not Spartan, but modest. So I think that he tried to do that with his kids. He originally, the trust that he created, which was probably around 2000. Some of these details, I'll issue this disclaimer about these points I'm about to make. It's difficult to know what the contents are of trusts often. We run into this regularly on this show. Now, many times, the most salacious stuff, the most voyeuristically promising stuff are things where people didn't do any planning, so we have no limitations. Everything ends up in probate. So in probate, it's a show. And everything that's filed, if there's a will even, that. But if there's no will, certainly what the court's doing because it's all public. With trusts, the motivation in many cases is in substantial part to have confidentiality. So when we're dealing with trusts, sometimes we get some of the information because segments or the document as a whole will be filed with a court as part of litigation. Sometimes that happens, but more often than not, courts either seal records relating to the contents of a trust, that's common, in order to protect the privacy. Other times it'll just be parts or segments of this. And I think in this case it's more the latter. But this is the trust that was created was one in which Leonard Cohen apparently wanted to have his son, his daughter, and his girlfriend, pretty long-standing girlfriend, to be the third party, and they were to share as trustees. And it's not unusual. It's not a bad thing to have co-trustees. Now, in this case, my discomfort would be that he didn't choose to have institutional trustees as just one co-trustee. That way, you have someone who's on the line who has insurance. They have the ability to pay if things go south or sideways. And in this case, we didn't have the benefit of that. So you have three individuals, but three individuals in this case who cared about him and who I think would have carried out his wishes and about whom there were some restraints. As trustees, the children couldn't simply hand money out to themselves. We don't know what all those terms were as the way in which income is to be distributed, but it's largely an income trust in which you can only reach in and grab principal for certain very specific urgent needs. Beyond that, it's a a payout regularly of interest distributions they're called. So mysteriously, when Leonard Cohen is declining, he has cancer. Although
Yes.
I read in a separate report that his actual death was attributed to a fall.
Yeah.
But he did have
But he had
cancer.
leukemia, yeah.
Yeah, so he would have died soon either way. So after the designation of his children and this girlfriend as trustee, sometime thereafter, Leonard Cohen apparently thought, maybe I need to put my manager on, my manager as a co-trustee or sole trustee, and then the children as successor trustees. Now, when you create a trust like this, and this was a living trust, so it was created where you are the trustee if you create it. In this case, Leonard Cohen was the trustee and the person who creates it. And he retained the ability to manage it up until the point that he becomes incompetent. Then you have a successor trustee. So really what we're talking about here is who is the first successor trustee. And it was the children and the girlfriend. It continued to be the children as a successor, but not as first successor. We don't know what triggered his maybe moving that around. It wasn't that he had a fallout with the children. It may be that his manager, a devious person by all accounts, perhaps persuaded him that it was too complicated, that he needed to have more authority. This manager was an attorney also. So anyway, apparently there was a point at which there was a substitution, but later Cohen recognized that, no, I need to have my children, and I trust my children, my previous girlfriend. So he changed it. He changed it back in July of 2016. So 2016 is the year in which he dies. So in July of that year, he makes this change, and he dies in November. So there's no dispute that he made this change. And when he did this, it meant that this manager would have lost a substantial source of income, because a trustee is entitled to be compensated for their services. And often that compensation is defined as a percentage of the revenue that's generated. So it doesn't seem too unreasonable that if you're managing $50 million in assets, that should require a substantial amount of time and effort. And if you do well and you cause it to generate $2 million in a given year, it's not unusual for the trustee to be paid 10%. It's not an extraordinary thing. Now, there are statutes in various states that prescribe in general terms how you calculate what they should be paid. In some states, in more specific terms, they treat it as they do a personal representative with a probate estate. And personal representatives, probate estates, it's very clear what those percentages are, with the right to deviate up, but not the suggestion you would go down. So, look, there's a reason lawyers become legislators. So the law is often favorable to a trustee as long as they're intensely loyal. They have to be entirely selfless as fiduciaries. So the standard of their loyalty and their selflessness is huge, but they are entitled to be paid. So that's not considered inconsistent with this, massive fiduciary responsibility that they carry. So anything that appears self-serving, apart from, of course, being able to be paid, that exact amount, not more, the law comes down hard. It's hard, it's punitive. So in this case, it appears that there was a substitution that occurred. And the evidence is almost irrefutable from what I've seen. What I've read are excerpts from a lawsuit that was filed by the children, and this was several years after Leonard's death, when it came to their attention that this substitution, in which Robert Corey, who is this attorney, former manager, is named as a trustee in place of the kids, presumably after 2016, if they even knew about the 2016. The kids may not have known about the 2016 change awarding them. But anyway, it eventually came to their attention. And we don't know how that happened, but we know that after 2016 in the state of California and filed in state court, in probate court, L.A., that the children filed an action alleging fraud and theft against this Robert Corey. And it turns out after a deposition, and seems shocking to me, I don't know how they came across this information. Somebody spoke up.
Yeah, I think it was Reeve Chudd who was his
The former
Robert
attorney
Corey's
representing
attorney.
Corey.
Yeah. I think he just came forward, maybe. But I feel like something led up to that, though. We're not sure.
Sometimes it's somebody in the law office who witnessed the execution of a will or a trust, or it could be the notary, it could be a paralegal. We don't know how. But anyway, what we have and what was attached with the motion, the pleadings with the court, the pleadings that were filed on behalf of the two children, was excerpts from a deposition. So there's actually a deposition of the lawyer who represented this former manager and lawyer, Robert Corey. So he was represented by a guy by the name of Reeve Chudd, 2 Ds, right?
Yes.
Reeve Chudd. And so Reeve Chudd is in this deposition, which you can find online. There are several sources where if you look up deposition, Leonard Cohen, probate estate. And in this deposition, Reeve Chudd is making the admission that he substituted a different signature page naming Corey to continue as this trustee and removing, and this is after the signatures that took place in July of 2016. So Leonard Cohen makes the change in July 2016, a bona fide exchange. Thereafter, apparently, Reeve Chudd, representing Robert Corey, substitutes a different signature page. He admits this in a deposition.
That's crazy to me.
Rarely do you get that sort of smoking gun, and I assume this is all bona fide. I saw it in several sources.
Especially because that's going to ruin his law career, wouldn't it? I mean, I would assume.
Oh, it's criminal,
Yeah.
and at a minimum, somebody who is guilty of such a thing would lose their license.
Yeah, that's what I figured. So, I mean, something must have happened that maybe a guilty conscience, who knows, that made him come forward.
Well, yeah, and Reeve seemed, in his defense, not defense, but it's certainly mitigating when somebody steps forward and says, what I did was wrong.
Yeah.
I wish I hadn't done it. It's a terrible thing. That was the sort of comments he was making in the deposition.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe he saw, as we'll get into it, but maybe he saw what was happening with the trust and what Corey was doing with all the money and just not doing really anything with it and thought, I don't want to let this keep going on and happen.
Yeah, it could be that it was pangs of conscience. We don't know what drove this and how the kids came by this information because I'm afraid things like this sometimes happen and the people never know. Like, let's assume the children didn't know they were named, or even if they did know they were named, if they just got informed by, the attorney of their dad, for example, at the time, often that's where this happens, the attorney representing, Leonard Cohen, for example, if they were just informed that he'd made a change, they may not have liked it. They may have questioned it.
Yes.
They may have said, that doesn't sound like Dad. But, there's nowhere you can go with that. And sometimes we know that happens in a genuine way where it really is, people conclude their kids don't have good judgment and they make those changes. So sadly, I'm afraid sometimes this sort of wrong occurs and it doesn't get righted because there's no one to speak up. And in this case, someone did speak up, and the litigation is being brought now where there's a lawsuit for, was it $58 million?
Yeah, around 58.
Yeah.
Because I think they're including anything that, like, any royalties, any interest and everything like that. That would have come off of it.
He did, meaning Robert Corey, who was functioning as the quote-unquote trustee, he did sign contracts apparently to transfer the intellectual property rights to a publishing company, and I think that was a $58 million deal. These numbers, again, you can't be real confident of them because you get different numbers from different reports. But one thing is clear. In the role of trustee, there were a number of transactions that took place that had a huge impact on the estate. So the kids want to unwind those and some they may not be able to unwind. If you're a third party dealing with a trust, and this is law throughout the United States, and it's law that exists for a good reason, it wants to allow trust to function easily like a person, so that if you have money in a trust that you've left to take care of your kids, whoever's running that trust, it's not going to get hassled every time they write a check to a bank or withdraw money from a bank, or they pay for tuition, or they try to pay for medical expenses, always getting hassled about providing proof of documents and signatures and all that. So the law in virtually all the states is intended to grease the skids, to allow trusts to just function like people. So they have laws that protect, they're called bona fide third parties. People dealing with the trustee who are bona fide, meaning they're not aware of any wrongdoing, they have clean hands, as the law calls it. And that here they are, they find out later, maybe from the lawyer representing Leonard Cohen's children, that this trustee that they gave this money to didn't have the authority. So you can see how nobody would do business with a trust. Banks wouldn't, publishing companies wouldn't. So in order to facilitate those sorts of transactions, you only go after and punish a third party if there's evidence that they knew or they had reason to know that someone was acting without authority, that there was something fishy up. But absent that, they don't have any duty, and this is true in virtually all the states. There's a uniform trust code that's been adopted by almost all the states. That these third parties that bought these rights, that's a downside of a trust, is if you have a bad trustee, you can't go to third parties and recover what's gone generally. Now, again, if you choose a trustee, though, that has deep pockets, an institutional trustee, then you have someone to recover it from. But now I will say this, had there been a transaction that was fishy, that was, maybe something normally $58 million and it was sold to them for 20 and the guy wanted cash. I mean, things like that, then they would say, third party, you're not a bona fide purchaser for value. Instead, you're somebody who actually knew, or if you didn't actually know, you certainly should have known that this was fishy. So the bar is high. The bar is high for you to recover from a third party if you have a bad trustee that has transferred your stuff. And in this case, the good news is it wasn't given away. I mean, there are contract rights. So while it may not be what it should have been, and if what is alleged here is true, and Corey, whether he spent the money, whether he misappropriated it, whatever he did, it appears that it's not going to be a dramatic reduction in the value of the trust. And they did, it appears, preempt a transaction in which he supposedly, just before Leonard's death, got him to sign a document that gave Corey 15% commission on anything he sells outside the trust, which incidentally would have belonged to the kids. So for him to give him that authority for assets outside the trust seems really odd, especially in light of what we know already about what happened within the trust regarding these signatures. So I think that there will be a large recovery here. Doubtlessly, there will be money that was lost. Yeah. I suspect there's not insurance by which they can fully recover, but it's not a cataclysmic disaster. The state is largely in place, worth a little less than it was, but with these kids' management going forward, I assume the court is going to they'll prevail in their action to be named as the trustees, that they will be able to go on.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is interesting that he didn't hire a company or anything like that and just chose his old manager. And I wonder, I mean, he did have leukemia, everything like that. So I wonder if he was in a different mental state or anything. But I did find that really interesting because it didn't really seem like Robert Corey popped up a lot in his life until just now. As I was reading everything, he was just at the very end, and he was kind of okay, I'll put this guy here, and then he went back on it, and obviously that all didn't work out. But.
He wasn't like Colonel Parker, who had been there throughout his whole career as with Elvis. Yeah, he seemed to have come along relatively late.
Yeah, and so I thought it was odd that he would trust somebody like that, because he seemed, besides all the spiritual stuff and everything like that, he seemed to have common sense and knowledge and know what's best for his trust. Obviously, he set one up and did everything his dad did. So I thought that was kind of interesting that he would just at random kind of name somebody.
He doesn't appear, you're right, he doesn't appear, while he wasn't somebody who was preoccupied with managing money, you're right, he wouldn't have done something frivolous.
Yeah.
Or reckless.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was kind of odd. But I'm sure, I don't think there'll be any, big thing that happens with this and it'll turn out any other way than the kids getting the money back and being named trustees.
Yeah, that's what I would expect. So I do encourage you, those of you who've sat here listening to this show thinking, Leonard Cohen, and having no idea who we're talking about other than what we've said, go listen to some of his songs.
Yes.
He's not a great singer, which will be apparent, but he never pretended to be. He didn't even want to sing. For a long time, he wasn't going to sing. I think it's Judy Collins that really talked him into, said, look, you write these songs. You have a good voice. You should sing them. She's the one who really insisted on it, and she was his biggest fan, so she got him to start singing on stage. But you can't judge him too much as a singer. You really have to ask yourself if you think the lyrics are good. Famous Blue Raincoat, I think, is great. I think it's one of his masterpieces. But Hallelujah, I assume you've all heard. So anyway, this is somebody who I chose. In the future, as is typical, I let Marlea pick out who to do, and maybe after this show.
It was a good topic. I enjoyed learning about it, so I think everybody else will.
Okay, we'll see. I welcome your comments. And remember, please like and subscribe. I mean, we love doing this. We don't monetize this channel, as you know, but we love to get your favorable or just your reviews. If you can tell us how to do it better, let us know, and over time we'll get better.
Yeah.
All right. Till next time, this has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement. Sponsored by Tucker Allen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit tuckerallen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.